Hey, this is Steven from LegitTechTutorials, and welcome to Beginning Unity. Continuing. Today we're going to talk about this particular tutorial set where we're going to be building a 2D game. So the type of game we're going to be building a 2D side-scroller, which is basically a continuous side-scroller. Your character is moved automatically and you have to jump, so there's going to be platforms. It's a 2D side-scroller platformer, meaning that you have to jump over platforms and also obstacles and not fall or hit the obstacles or you die. So a couple things of like that will be, so we're going to have platforms, gaps in between the platforms. If you fall off the platform, you die. There's also going to be enemies. If you hit the enemies, you die. There's also going to be obstacles that you have to jump over. If you hit the obstacles, you die. If there's going to be pickups, so power-ups, stuff like invincibility, where you get one hit once you hit something, then it takes away the invincibility and stuff like that, as well as running animations. And it's of course 2D, so everything is going to be in sprites, which you're going to learn here in a second. So that's basically it. Those other two videos that you watched, those are basically for anything. Those are introduction to the editor for basically any set. So those are going to be in any Unity set that I do. These videos are particularly for this particular tutorial set of this particular game. Okay, and also another thing, I'm going to be doing JavaScript on this particular tutorial. I will probably do a video at the end in order to concat, or whatever you want to call it, parse from JavaScript into C#. So basically how to translate JavaScript to C# with just being able to look at it and being able to translate it, because they definitely work differently. JavaScript has a little bit of a lower intro difficulty rather than C#. C# has got a little bit higher difficulty, but it is a better language to use when you get better at it. JavaScript, not so much, but it's good for beginners, so that's why I'm going to use it. So we're going to be using JavaScript instead of C#. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. So when we get into the programming, it would be preferable if you go onto my channel and watch something called How to Program Tutorial Series. That is a tutorial series where I'm you'll see it on my channel. It should be the very first playlist there underneath uploads. And I'm basically writing on a tablet, and I'm explaining how the backbone of programming works. And now that particular series is regardless of language. So we're talking about integers, variables, whatnot. And that will help you jump in to this particular series very quickly. I am going to do a couple segues into, because of JavaScript, I don't have any tutorials for JavaScript. And it's actually technically Unity script, which means that it's not exactly JavaScript. It is basically Unity's version of JavaScript. Reason being is that JavaScript is a scripting language and it's used mainly online. In this case, we're using it in an applet version where we're scripting to link to some other code, C++ probably. So watch that series, and then if you want to learn more about a specific language, you could watch Java, or you could go straight to this and learn JavaScript. And I might do another series on JavaScript in the web, and also another one with JavaScript mainly just in mono develop, doing different kinds of problems and whatnot. So yeah, but this particular series is going to be JavaScript. It's going to get you started a little quicker, get you to understand how to use the Unity engine, because a lot of the classifications and the what's the word I'm looking for, and a lot of the library objects all have the same name, but obviously the syntax is different, and JavaScript is going to be very different than anything that I have in my my YouTube for those particular syntax style, as it's different from the rest. Mainly being because it's a web scripting language, or it's based off of a web scripting language. Alright, so if I remember anything, I will add it in while the tutorial goes on here. So let's go ahead and get started. So I open back up my tutorial that I linked into my draw. Oh yeah, another thing that I want to mention. I'm probably not going to post the assets for this particular game. Reason being is that we are I want it to be like your own design. I've taught this to kids one time, and I'm also going to teach it to kids here coming up. I'm going to teach a class. I basically showed them the code because you'll see Unity is very good at like dragging and dropping stuff. I basically showed them the code, and they basically made their own game design. They used the same code, but it was completely different style game as far as the sprites that they used. So you could use your own sprites. You don't have to use my sprites. But I am going to be showing animations. If you want to use the animations, like a walking animation, which is basically linking through, is playing frames of a sprite over and over and over again, looping through, using, to show you the Unity animation engine and stuff like that. But if you could find a sprite sheet and be able to create your own animation, you could create your own assets if you're a 3D artist. And if this is a great tutorial series right here, if you're a 3D artist and you want to get into game engines, because you're ready just to load your stuff in there, and basically, as they call it, it's reskinning, like a reskin game. So you take what I make and you reskin it to match your particular style. So I might set up like GitHub or something for you to pull all the assets out, or Dropbox, or redo my website to get that up, and I will let you guys know about that later on in the series, or put it in announcements or whatever. Another thing being, this is going to also parallel Unreal Engine 4, so it's going to be the same exact game. I'm going to try to get as close as possible to being the same exact thing, and we're going to bring those head to head. So if you're looking for an engine and you can't decide, just like myself, I've used Unity a lot more than Unreal Engine, but if you can't really decide which engine you want to stick with and use for most of your applications, obviously there's some reasons for you to use one over the other, but if you're not quite sure yet, then this series will definitely solidify that up for you, which one you want to use, because we're going to be making the same exact game except for with the two different workflows. And then we're also going to run them on two different devices. We're going to publish it and see how it works on the same device, both games, to see which one has better performance. So it's almost like engine versus engine, and we're going to see how that works out. This one here being more of the user, is better for beginners, but the other one you could do, definitely, it's got a lot more power in it. Okay, so let's of course there's all different. I might do a separate video just going over that stuff. It's not necessarily my style right now. I mainly do tutorials, but I might do those types of comparison videos where I could compare. I might do that after this series, I might not. Okay, so yeah, so you could basically watch both series. You can watch this series and you can watch the other series as well, and see which engine you like the best for your type of workflow style. Alright, so staying true, back to the tutorial here, staying true to how I set up most of my setup template type of setting up my project space. So I moved some stuff around. As you see, you could, if your console's right here, you could pick up your console, move it in here, and then you can move stuff around like that. Also, my game used to be like this, so I dragged and dropped it here. So now they're two separate pieces. Sorry about this 3 and 50 stuff. Actually, no, you shouldn't be able to see that. I don't know if you'll see that, these numbers up here, but that's my on-screen display for NVIDIA Experience. So that's my graphics card pasting the frames per second there. Okay, so let's go ahead and start. After I set that up, make sure you go to Game and hit Maximize on Play. You click this button here, and we should be good to go. So we're going to go over a couple different things. We're going to go over stuff like components, physics components, box colliders. We're going to go over some scripting, some JavaScript scripting, and some basics of the JavaScript scripting, and how to pass things back and forth which is really, really good in Unity. Pass stuff back and forth between the Unity editor and also your programming language, your script, right? Okay. So let's go ahead and get started. What I did here is when you go to Assets, I created a folder. So you right-click, Create folder, name it assets, levels, and then scripts, and then you're going to drag and drop your level 1 into levels. This being a 2D side scroller, it of course is comprised with levels, so you have like level 1, level 2, level 3. You get to the end point and you progress a level. Then we have your scripts folder, which is where you're going to load in a script. I used to have a C# script, now I have a JavaScript script, so don't worry about that. Just delete that C# script you had. And then of course we have the assets folder. That's where we're going to keep all of our assets like sprites and walking animations and everything. Okay, so first thing that we're going to do is we're going to load in a sprite. Now, I have a separate screen. I have a 2-screen configuration, so I'm going to pull it from the other screen so that stuff doesn't show up on the screen you're looking at. Basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to load in a sprite. So what is a sprite? A sprite is basically a 2D image that you can make and stuff. In this case, one of my friends made this 3D model, and we basically, in Maya, we took just a snapshot of that model. Just a picture, rendered it, saved it. And we also did a animation where we rigged it, and we did a walking animation from both sides, and we took that animation and we saved it as a sprite sheet so we could use it as an animation. But you could look everywhere on the internet for it. What I would do is I would find something called a sprite sheet or a sprite atlas. And that basically, what it looks like is it's like a spread. Let me see. I'll just open that up really quick, so you could get an image, an idea of what I'm working with. Even though, well, right now we're not going to be working with the sprite sheet. We're going to do that later with animation. So I'm just going to show you what I'm going to be using. It's just a basic PNG file of my character called Poppy. We're going to use it for both series and maybe even like an actual combat series. And I'm gonna have just his standing picture. So basically his first frame in the animation. And I have a 20-frame animation in a sprite sheet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag this. So I'm grabbing it at my other screen, and now I'm dragging it onto this screen, and I'm loading it into my assets folder. Now you see, here's my character. So you'll see in the inspector here that it is a PNG, and you can see it down here at the bottom. Sprite mode is single. It's not a sprite atlas, so we need it single. Pivot, center, and here you see the sprite editor. Different types of filter modes, max size, compress, whatever. And it is a very, very, very high detailed, high resolution sprite. It doesn't really need to be that crazy, but that's just what I'm going to work with. And I could resize it however I want, and chances of it being lowering itself in quality is not going to be too bad, even though the file size is pretty decent. So it doesn't really matter what size image you have. Even if you have a sprite sheet, I will show you how to break that up in a later tutorial, or I'll even show you. Actually, let's just show you right now. So this is the first time I have used this particular action. So let's hope it works pretty well. So let's go ahead. I'm going to drag in my sprite sheet. You'll see it take a while to load because it's a very, very big file size, about 5K. Which is 5 megabytes, obviously, 5K kilobytes. A lot smaller size, obviously, so very, very interesting. What I'm going to do is I'm going to change this to Sprite 2D, and then I want it to go to multiple. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into Sprite Editor, and I'm going to cut up this Sprite Atlas. And you see it down here in the bottom, and here it is here. So here I maxed it out full screen. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Slice, Automatic, and then let's see it Pivot Center. Let's see if it can slice it correctly. No, it didn't. I hope I don't have to. I'm going to have to grid it. Okay. So basically what I'm going to do is let me try to get it to do automatic again. It's not going to allow me to do that. And it's a huge sprite sheet, so that's why you see that error there. Let me go ahead and just try a grid. Let's do it like so it's going to have to be it's about 700 by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is 500 by 700. There we go. And then this is going to be about 550. It's close. So as you see here, it doesn't really, they're not completely evenly spaced padding. Even though they should technically be that way. Okay. Actually, what I'm going to do, since I don't want to just rename that, what I'm going to call this okay. So this is actually pretty important. So, I didn't mean to do that. Sorry about that. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that again. So we're going to slice with a grid, 560 by that. And now it's going to have Poppy frame 1, frame 2, etc., etc. Not exactly how I wanted to do it. That's not what I wanted to do. Let me. I'm just trying to get the naming convention down. So let's just do copy frame. Open up the Sprite Editor. Cut it. Automatic. Grid. That's good. So now we have the naming convention. Frame 0. So let's take a look at what that looks like. Okay, so that's applied. Now that's what that looks like. As you see here, there's obvious errors. So what we need to do is we need to flesh all those out. So see here, this one's good. Basically what the grid is for is it's just to pick the size. As you see, the size is not bad, but we just have to polish that up a little bit. Actually, right here it's almost perfect. This one a little too far. This one's a little too far. As you see, very tedious work. That's why you usually have somebody else do this. And some of these are cutting the dude's head off. By the way, this character's name is Poppy. Obviously, if you're going to use your own sprite, I'm going to call him character from a certain point on. So, and these frames are really tight. Also, I used a sprite packer, so you're going to have to find your own sprite packer. So I'm probably not going to mention it. I just use a texture packer or whatever, the free version for right now. And he's Alright, that looks good for right now. Okay. So put enough time into that. So that's what we got. It's applied. Now we have a lot better looking textures except for that last one. I will I'll finish editing that outside the video. You get the gist now of how to do that. So yeah, you get the gist of how to do that. So what we're gonna do is instead we're going to use our first animation. So in order to, what we're going to do is we're going to drag this sprite into our scene. And now once I dragged it into our scene, we have a sprite and it comes up with a name here. What we're going to do is we're going to right click, rename that to main character. There you go. So now we have main camera, main character in our hierarchy. And you see when we click on that guy, that's what comes up. And also I see that he's not necessarily centered perfectly, but that's fine. Then what we're going to do is we're also going to create a box, because what we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about colliders and we're going to talk about physics. So we'll go ahead and do that now. So I'm going to do a 3D object, and later I'm going to have a sprite. You can even find a sprite like a brick or mortar or something, brick and mortar platform or whatever you want to make for a platform. You could even model it in Maya or whatever and then put it in here. But right now I'm just going to make a cube. You see that we place it in here. It's already in our modification tool, and you have to use W to move and R to scale. So we're going to scale that. And now you already see something weird on this. If I click on Poppy here, if I just click W, you notice that he doesn't have a background, meaning that there's no outline around his body. But when we click on the 3D cube, you notice that it has a green outline. And what that is it's called a box collider. It's called it's generally called a collider. So here you have a collider. And you could also edit that collider. What a collider does is basically allows us to have two colliders interact with each other. So when they hit, they could either be a trigger or just a standard collider. What you see here is trigger. So that's something like a doorway. When you pass through a doorway, the doorway is invisible, but when you pass through a box, it'll trigger something to happen, whatever. So in this case, what we need is we need a collider between two different objects, because that's the definition of interaction between two things. So what we need is we need a collider for our other object. So let's go ahead and add collider. We're gonna to our main character. So you're gonna click on your main character, hit Add Component, and we want a Physics 2D, and just we're gonna use a box collider in ours. But let me just show you the cooler collider of all of them when you're working with sprites. It's called a polygon collider. And a polygon collider will basically cut your image into polygons to work with. So there is one issue with that, being that he's too top heavy, and his foot here will cause him to tip over. But let's just roll with that for right now, and then we'll change it to a box collider here in a second. So what I want to talk about is also the physics characteristics, because right now what will happen is when we hit play, nothing will happen. Poppy stands there, and also the box just stands there. And also you can see that the sprite picked up something else there. Sprite's not cut perfectly, but once I recut the sprite, it'll automatically update this guy. So what I want to do is I want to add a physics 2D characteristic to this particular character, meaning that it will be interacting with physics. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a physics 2D Rigidbody 2D. Basically what a Rigidbody 2D is it goes to the engine and it says, I want the physics engine to interact with this particular component. And one of those physics characteristic is the mass, and mass of course means gravity is involved. So linear drag, angular drag, gravity scale, fixed angle is kinematic, and all this other collision stuff. But we're still going to have one problem. When we click on him, he now falls because gravity is interacting with the character sprite. But we notice that it falls through our box. The issue being that the box is not doesn't have a physics 2D component itself. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back. We're going to add the physics 2D Rigidbody 2D. And you notice that there's some sort of glitch. I don't know why they have this glitch still. It's been in here since 4.6, where you can't add the rigid body on top of the box collider for some dumb reason. So you always have to go here, and you're going to hit this little cog and hit Remove Component. So you're going to go back to Physics 2D, and you're going to add the rigid body, then you're going to re-add the box collider. So now everything is complete. You see the box collider automatically finds the corners and is perfectly sized. Same thing here. It's got all the same components as a... of course, this is a 3D model. It's actually a 3D cube, but we could just use Rigidbody 2D. But as you can see, between the sprite and this box and this cube, it has the same exact components because it's identical. It has the same exact attributes. So let's go ahead and play. You'll see our error. Our error is that now the ground falls just as fast as our main character does. So what we could do is there's actually a small checkbox that you could check that tells the engine to not apply gravity to this particular component. And that is in your Rigidbody 2D is kinematic. So that's basically telling the physics 2D engine inside Unity that this is our ground or whatever. We don't want it to fall. It is technically rigid, right? It is the lowest low that you could go. So basically what we're telling it is that this is the ground, and we don't want it to fall. So now we'll see that issue of our Poppy, the main character, being top heavy and falling over. So that, of course, we're going to need to modify the the animation, which actually what I want to do is I'm going to drag in this one, and then I'm going to see if that gives me what I want here. Polygon collider. Grab something though. It's the guy's head from the next one. I'll have to edit that, but for right now, we're perfectly fine. Rigidbody. Let's see if he could stand up this way. If I edited that out, which I might even be able to. Okay, let's give that a try. It should now just... Sweet. Okay, so I gave it a little bit extra padding. But, yeah. So it's perfectly fine. So, but what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to remove this and just go with a box collider, because it's better for this case. As you see, it's very, very close. But what we're going to do is, if I wanted to modify the collider, I'm going to hit the Edit Collider button, and now I could go in and edit the collider. I'm not going to have the bazooka in the collider, because that's not what we want to use right now. So we're going to take both sides of the, and also, of course, because it's not flesh or whatever. So that's perfect. Now you'll notice that because it's a box collider, he walks perfectly. Of course, being that if this guy here, the padding is a little weird. There you go. Okay, so now he's on the base and he lands on top. So what I wanted to do is just go over a small one last thing before we're done here is I just wanted to go over how you link this particular thing to something in your script. But before we do that, we're going to clean up our hierarchy. So we're going to call that main character, or we're going to call our cube plat 1. This is our first platform. Of course, we have to create separate platforms for each of the different for each of the different things he's got to clear. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a script to interact between stuff in our scene and the script that we write, the code that we write. So in order to do that, we're going to work on this JavaScript. In order to create the JavaScript, you had a C# before. What you're going to do with C# is right-click, delete it. But what you're going to do in this case, go right-click, create JavaScript. Now I'll create this JavaScript. And I named it character, and you can do that by just selecting it. That's actually not what I wanted to do. Yeah, just selecting it and then clicking in that box, and I just called it character. So what we're going to do is we start in monodevelop, and I already had it running, and we have this empty JavaScript component here. And it's a little tweaked out right now for some reason. is missing a couple things. I think I screwed up the basics here. I don't know. Okay, it's fine. Okay, we're fine. All right. So what we have here is we have the basic. Let me go ahead and go into what's going on here, even though we're not going to use it right now. The basic. Also, like I said, you'll understand this a little more if you watch that other how-to program series or a Java series. But I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt and go over extra here, as this is a separate language that I don't have any tutorials on elsewhere. So what we have is we have something called functions. Functions are also identical to methods. They're the exact same thing. Basically what it is it's a block to loop through code, right? It's basically a container for code to go in, and they call them methods or functions. And we have a basic game loop, which is start, which basically means that it will run the code that you put in between these two brackets when you start the game up. When the game starts and everything is created, all the basic objects to run the engine are created, it will go into the start and initialize a couple things that you put in here. And then we have the function update. So basically the function update is called every time your computer draws a frame. Every time that the game engine draws a frame on screen, it will call the update. So this is where you handle key presses and stuff like that, and also movement and whatever. And that's where you see the frames per second. Frames per second means how many times it could call through this, how many times it could call through the entire loop, including stuff in the engine that actually draws the stuff for you, that you don't really need to write any code to work with OpenGL and, you know, the direct connection between the video card and the code. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a basic object for you to understand how we link stuff from the editor into the code. So what we're going to do is we're going to just create a basic variable, and this is going to look very weird if you watched any of my other series, as JavaScript looks very different from the other type of syntax. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do variable character of type game object. And you notice here that stuff turns blue and whatnot. So basically how I always explained it to people is that there's two hard things in programming. Number one is data structures, stuff like linked lists and data trees and all that kind of stuff. And number two is working with libraries. So here we're working with libraries, which means that you're going to learn a lot about how to work with other code people already wrote, and that's pretty big in the industry. Also, how to read documentation, and I'll introduce you to that a little later. How to read the engine documentation on how to implement things. I might even do that in the next tutorial. So let me go over the syntax really quick here, as this, like I said, is a new language and I don't have any tutorials on my website about it. I mean on my YouTube. So what basically this says is it's a variable, var, short for variable. The identifier or the call sign or whatever you want to call it is character, and the colon is basically of type. So a variable called character of type, it's a game object, and a game object is linked to the Unity engine. It's basically the parent of everything. So everything in your everything that is in your editor has a base, is like it's at its lowest level. It is a game object. So you have game object and like transform, you know, stuff like that. So everything is of type game object. Everything that you see in the hierarchy on the left hand side. So for example, if I go back, everything in here is of type game object. They're all game objects. So we can do this here. So it says variable character of type game object close. What we're going to do is we're going to go build tutorial, and it'll go through, give us a couple of errors saying that we oh, they might have actually removed that. That's interesting. Huh, they must have loaded that in there. Interesting. Because I had to use that. Anyways, we're going to close this. As you see, we have no errors, so it's compiled successfully. Now what we need to do is the script will actually do nothing until we attach it into our game. So what we're going to do is we're going to attach that just to our main camera. So let me go ahead and remove this component. Let's go ahead and add scripts. So we're going to go add component, scripts, and our character script. And now a weird thing happens. You'll notice that what we named in our script here, character, also everything in the editor whenever you look at it is in uppercase. So here we have variable character shows back up in our editor here. It says character and it says of type game object. So basically this is really cool with Unity. All you have to do is link what you want to talk to into that box. And how do you link it? Very easily. All you have to do is just drag and drop. So let's just mess around. I'm mainly that's supposed to be for my character, but if you want to see if it is of that type, you'll notice here that that 3D platform down here is also of type game object. Oh. You also have to make sure that what you're going to link the script to is selected. So make sure that main camera is selected and that the character game object is in there, because you have to have that selected in order to mess with the script, because each game object up here in the hierarchy has different components, obviously. So you have to make sure that you're talking to the one that has that game object, that has that component added to it, in this case a script. So you see here it doesn't have it, and you see here it doesn't have it. It's only in our main camera. And don't just duplicate it multiple times for each thing, because it's not going to get you what you want. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to grab our main character and drop him in. And now our main character is linked from our editor to our script. So now even though you don't see this, it is actually linked there. And the reason why we could do that is because this is a public variable. And by default in JavaScript, all of your variables are defaulted to public, so I don't have to write public here. So I could access it inside of the engine, inside of the editor itself. Also, another thing you could do is you could hit this little circle, and it gives you all of the possible options in the scene that you could add to. As you see, everything is of type game object. So I could pick, main camera, main character, platform, but what I want is my main character selected. So that's how we're going to easily add link stuff from our editor into stuff that is inside of our scene. And by doing that, we're going to be able to manipulate it and do different kinds of cool things. So I'm basically going to call the series at that. Unfortunately, we had to do a lot of stuff with the sprite sheet, but that is the best thing to work with. It's best to start it now so you're ready for your animation. And of course, you're going to want it. You're going to want your character facing the right-hand side, because it's going to be a continuously walking character. So he's just going to keep walking that way. And I don't know if I'm going to do a jumping animation. Obviously, it's the same exact thing. But you're going to want him to have a run animation or a walk animation to the right, facing to the right. Alright, so I'm going to have to fix that. Fix all the sprites so they all work. But yeah, just look online, find some free domain stuff, find a Sprite Atlas, take it in here, cut it up how you just saw it, and deal with it that way. And then you could have your own character for your own style, or you could even, if you're a animator, you could do it, or if you're an animator or a 2D artist, you can make your own assets, make it pixelated, whatever you want to do. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and recap what we just did. So I dragged, not what we just did, but what we did throughout this particular tutorial. So what we did is we brought in a sprite sheet, we cut it up, and we did that by clicking on the sprite, you change it from sprite mode single to multiple, and then you go into the Sprite Editor. I did a grid. Sometimes if they're split far enough apart, the automatic will automatically cut them up, but in this case it did not, so you have to do manual resizing and whatnot of that. Alright, and here we have a compressed, nice default style, whatever. And then you could look at your sprites by hitting this little arrow, and I picked the one where he's flat-footed as my main sprite. So I could have picked this one or this one or this one. They're all very, very similar. I think this guy here is Poppy 7. Probably should have picked Poppy 6. I could do that very easily by Poppy 6 is flat-footed. Bam, already done. Good to go. Okay, so after you do that, then I created a 3D block here with a box collider. A box collider again, meaning that if you have two colliders between two different objects, it will help you interact with the physics engine. If two collide, it helps the physics engine repel the two. That's why when they contact here, you see that one stays on top of the other. That's because of the box collider here and the box collider here. You can do that by hitting adding component. And another thing is the Rigidbody 2D, which is basically telling the engine that we want the physics engine to interact with this particular object. And that will allow us to have collisions. So what we're going to do is we're going to have this rigid body on kinematic. This is the platform, and kinematic basically means that this object does have physics applied to it, but I want it to ignore gravity. So that's what this is, kinematic or not. And it tells you right here if you hover over it, or if you hover over the is kinematic, whether the body is kinematic or not. If not, then the body is dynamic. So dynamic means that it's, obviously interacted with by gravity and whatnot. Alright, another thing, main character. I could also do is fixed angle, that will keep him from rotating. But, yeah. So he's also got a rigid body, he's a dynamic body, so he's interacted by physics, gravity, sorry, mainly interacted by gravity. The is kinematic is turned off, and we're good to go on that. Another thing is I created a script by right-clicking, create JavaScript. JavaScript's good. I went and I opened it up here. I created this is obviously JavaScript, so I have a variable character of type GameObject, and then I linked my main character to that script by going to my main camera, adding component, scripts, character, and then here you see it here. And then I added my main character into that character variable that I'm going to reference inside of the particular script. Is by I just grabbed my main character. I just kept main camera selected, and I just grabbed and held it and dropped it in there. Or I used the small bubble and double-clicked main character. And that's basically it for this tutorial. So like I said, if you haven't already, make sure you watch that series, How to Program at least, and then you'll understand this a lot better. And then even if you watched like Java or C++ or C, you'll definitely understand this very, very quickly, and you'll get through it very quickly. So you might even want to invest the time through that. At least watch the beginning of each of those, because I believe for Java I have beginning, intro, intermediate, and advanced. So you just probably need to watch the intro, the beginning. Yeah, so that's basically it for this tutorial. This is Steven from LegitTechTutorials. I thank you for watching. Please stay subscribed for the next video in this series, and also if you want to, I would also check out Unreal Engine 4 series as it parallels this series as well. We're going to be making the same exact game and seeing how the two compare to each other as far as the performance and also the workflow. Go ahead and be looking for your assets that you want to use. You could look for a platform down here, and I'll show you how to change that later. Look for your character sprite sheet atlas, and basically what you're going to look for is you're going to look for a sprite sheet that has a walking animation that walks to the right. Your character is facing to the right. And then you're going to want to cut up all those sprites, make sure all those sprites are nice and cut up, and you're good to go. I will be looking for a book so that you could also read the book to follow along with the series as well, to look at another person's perspective that took the time to write the book. And yeah, and I might host the stuff, I might not, I probably won't, so you could, reskin the game however you want. Alright, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching. Take it easy. Peace.